The scanner flagged her before she even reached the desk. Not a red flag, not even yellow, just a soft amber pulse, the kind the system throws when it doesn't know what it's looking at. I'd seen that amber pulse maybe 3 times in 6 years of working customs and verification at Hellion Transit Station. Once it was a prosthetic knee replacement made from an experimental polymer. Once it was a crystallized fungal colony from Tethys that a researcher was transporting in a mason jar. And once, this is true, it was a child's toy that had somehow absorbed trace radiation from a military-grade engine exhaust vent near Platform 9. 3 times in 6 years. Then she walked up to my station, and the amber pulse started again. My name is Davin Rell. I work mid-shift at Hellion Transit, which is the 3rd largest transit hub in the Confederacy and easily the most chaotic. We process about 60,000 passengers every standard cycle. Humans, Veth, Karali, the big slow Doran who need modified queuing lanes because their shoulder span is wider than a standard corridor. The Sol, who don't exactly have faces but communicate through color shifts on their torso skin, which makes them either very expressive or very difficult to read depending on who you ask. I've been doing this long enough that I can tell at a glance whether someone is nervous because they're carrying something illegal or nervous because they're just nervous. Most people are just nervous. Customs booths do that to people. Something about the lights, maybe. Or the knowledge that the machines are reading you, even when no one's paying attention. She didn't look nervous. That was the first thing I noticed. She was standing in line at Gate 7, which is the mixed-species civilian arrival lane, not quite the fastest but not the slowest, and she had the kind of stillness that you only see in people who have been through something. Not soldiers exactly. Soldiers have a different quality. They're trained to be still. Her stillness wasn't trained. It was earned. She was short, maybe 165. Dark hair pulled back with a single clip, the cheap kind you can buy at any transit market. Worn jacket, brown canvas, the kind with too many pockets. Work boots. Hands at her sides, not fiddling with her bag strap, not checking her travel card, not doing any of the small anxious things that 60% of travelers do when they're waiting in line. She was just standing there, watching the board above Gate 7 cycle through arrival confirmations, and she had that look, the one where someone isn't really watching the board at all. They're just giving their eyes somewhere to land while their mind is somewhere else entirely. I noticed her because of the stillness. The scanner flagged her because of the knife. Let me explain how the scan system works, because it matters. The passive array at Hellion Transit uses a layered detection protocol developed by Sol engineering teams about 40 years ago, then modified extensively by the Veth, and then modified again by humans when we joined the Confederacy, and discovered that the original system had about a 12% false positive rate on carbon-based organics. The current version, version 9.4, which we've been running for about 8 years, doesn't just detect items. It categorizes them. It cross-references against a material database that contains over 4 million registered substances, alloys, compounds, biological composites, and manufactured goods. When it finds a match, it flags with a color. Green means common, no action required. Blue means uncommon, log for statistical record. Yellow means unusual, secondary scan recommended. Red means stop everything. Amber, that's soft, almost apologetic amber pulse, means the system found something that doesn't match any category cleanly. Something it can recognize the components of but cannot classify as a known object. Something that sits between categories. The scanner doesn't get confused often. When it does, it's because the object is old, older than the database, or composite in ways the database doesn't anticipate, or made using methods that have been lost or are so rare they didn't make it into standard cataloging. The amber pulse started when she was still 12 meters from my desk. By the time she reached me, the system had been running secondary analysis for about 40 seconds. In scan terms, that's a long time. She handed me her travel card without being asked. Practiced motion. She'd done this before. Davinrel, the system murmured in my earpiece, using the calm, neutral voice it always used for alerts. Flagged item detected on traveler. Material composition partially identified. Requesting manual secondary review. Name? I asked her, mostly to establish interaction while I watched my secondary screen. Ciraveau, she said. Her voice was low, not unfriendly, just economy. Origin of travel. Call station. Before that, Outer Rim survey posting. Designation 74 Bravo. Outer Rim survey postings. That explains some of the worn quality. The Outer Rim survey rotations ran 18 months minimum, sometimes 30. Out past the last relay beacon, cataloging resource deposits on worlds that didn't have names yet, just designation numbers. Hard work. Lonely work. The kind of work that gave people that particular quality of stillness. Length of visit to Hellion. Transit only. I'm catching the connector to Arith in 6 hours. Do you have any items to declare? She nodded just once. 1 blade, non-combat rating, personal carry, issued under survey crew exemption. Survey crews were permitted personal carry tools including blades. Standard policy. The survey exemption covered utility knives, harvesting tools, anything non-military that was documented as crew issued. Can you present the item? She reached into the left pocket of her jacket. Not the right, not her bag, the left jacket pocket, which meant she'd been keeping it close and accessible without being conspicuous, and placed it on the examination surface between us. I looked at it. It was a knife. I mean that literally and without any embellishment. It was just a knife. The kind of thing you'd find in a supply catalog under General Utility, Grade 2. Handle wrapped in dark cord, worn smooth in specific places where a hand had held it thousands of times. Blade about 18 centimeters. Single edge. The steel was dark, not black, not silver, more like the color of deep water on a cloudy day, a kind of muted gray-blue that shifted slightly depending on the angle of the light. The tip had been resharpened at least twice. I could see the slight change in the bevel angle near the point where someone had worked it on a stone. The edge itself was extraordinary, clean, and even in a way that suggested either very careful maintenance or material that held an edge unusually well. But it looked ordinary. If you handed me that knife before I'd seen the scanner flag, I would have logged it as utility blade, personal survey crew exemption, no further action. Except my secondary screen was now running a full material spectrography, and the results were coming back in a way I had never seen before. Rel, said my supervisor's voice in my earpiece. Court, who'd been running customs for 20 years and who I had never once heard sound uncertain. He sounded uncertain now. I'm seeing your secondary screen feed. Hold the traveler at station. I'm coming down. I kept my voice level. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to wait just a moment while we complete secondary verification. She looked at me directly for the first time. Her eyes were dark brown, and they had that survey crew quality, the kind of eyes that were used to long distances, to scanning horizons, to watching for things that didn't belong in a landscape. They read me very quickly and accurately. It's the knife, she said. It wasn't a question. Standard secondary verification, I said. I know what the scanner found, she said. Not defensive, not nervous, something closer to resignation. It does that every time. I kept my face neutral. Can you describe the item for the record? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, it was my grandmother's. Court arrived at gate 7 3 minutes later with one of the Veth technical consultants, Irath, who handled material anomalies for our station, and who moved with the particular deliberate grace of the Veth, all long limbs and considered motion. Erath picked up the knife from the examination surface with both hands, which was unusual. Veth typically handled items with one hand unless they were being careful about something. They turned it slowly, and I watched their color shift, the Veth equivalent of facial expression, move through a sequence I'd never seen on Erath before. They were almost always a steady pale silver green. Professional composure. Now there was something warmer in it, a deep amber gold threading through the green. The Veth color for recognition, I remembered from the training materials, or for reverence. The two were apparently related in Veth emotional taxonomy. Spectrography returned a partial match, Court said, looking at his tablet. He was a big man, Court, ex-cargo handler still built like one. He frowned at his tablet the way he frowned at everything with his whole face. The alloy composition is Erath. Can you translate this? Because the system is describing something I genuinely do not recognize. Erath set the knife down carefully. Their color had settled into that amber gold, steady and deep. The base material, Erath said, their translator rendering their voice into calm, considered standard, is an iron-nickel alloy. But the composition ratios are unusual. The trace elements include iridium, platinum group oxides, and crystalline silicate structures that are not consistent with any smelted or manufactured steel. Not manufactured, Court repeated. Not manufactured, Erath confirmed. The crystalline structure is consistent with material of extraterrestrial origin, specifically material that experienced ablative heating, atmospheric entry, over an extended period and then slow cooling. In geological terms, slow means hundreds of thousands of years. The Gate 7 lane had mostly processed through, while we'd been doing secondary. There were a few travelers waiting, giving us the politely curious looks that travelers give when they can tell something is happening, but aren't sure if it concerns them. Siravo was watching Erath the way she'd been watching everything, with that distance, that careful quiet. You're describing a meteorite, I said. I'm describing a blade forged from meteorite iron, Erath said, which is not the same thing as a blade forged from iron that happens to be unusual. Meteorite iron, true siderite, fallen iron, whatever term you prefer, has a crystalline structure called a Widman-Stettin pattern. It forms over millennia during the slow cooling of metallic asteroids. It cannot be replicated in a forge. It cannot be manufactured. It can only be worked, shaped, and edged from material that fell from space. And it hasn't been done reliably in. They paused, tilted their head. I would need to research the human historical record more carefully, but I believe the last verified instances of worked meteorite iron weapons are from pre-industrial Earth, multiple centuries old at minimum, some considerably older. The gate was quiet. Siravo looked at the knife on the examination surface. It was my grandmother's, she said again, quietly. She said it was her grandmother's too. Part 2, what the database couldn't hold. We took her to the secondary review room, not the detention suite, just the standard secondary room, which has better lighting and actual chairs, and a table that doesn't look like it belongs in an interrogation scene from a cheap drama. Protocol for flagged items during secondary review. She came without any resistance, carrying her bag over one shoulder and not looking like someone who was particularly surprised by any of this. I brought her tea. I don't know why, it just seemed like the right thing to do. The secondary rooms had a dispenser, and she'd been traveling from the outer rim, and the transit from Call Station is a 22-hour journey even on the fast connector, and she looked like she hadn't slept properly in several days. She accepted the tea without comment, which told me she was a practical person. Court pulled in 2 additional consultants while we waited for the formal material report to complete. Dr. Yen Palath from the Historical Verification Division, a small, precise woman with gray-streaked hair who specialized in pre-Confederacy Earth artifacts, and a Karali cultural attaché whose name I couldn't pronounce, and who introduced himself as Teth 7 for convenience. They're not here to cause you trouble, I told her, because she was watching the new arrivals with that careful distance, and I wanted her to have accurate information. The material report flagged this as a potential historical artifact. There's a verification protocol. Am I going to lose it? She asked. Not angry, just direct. That's not typically what happens with personal items under historical artifact protocols. The usual process is documentation. She nodded, drank her tea. Dr. Paleth sat down across from her and placed a recording tablet on the table between them, angled so both could see it. Ms. Vo, I want to be straightforward with you. The material analysis on your blade has come back with some very significant findings. Can you tell us what you know about its history? Sira Vo set down her tea. She looked at the knife, which was sitting on a clean examination cloth in the center of the table. Then she looked out the window. The secondary room had a window that looked out onto the main transit floor, and through the glass you could see the constant motion of the hub, 60,000 travelers per cycle, all of them going somewhere. My grandmother was named Vo Ashat, she said. She was born on a colony world called Marath, which isn't there anymore. It was decommissioned about 30 years ago. Before that, her family was from Earth, one of the early diaspora settlements. I don't know exactly which part of Earth. My grandmother said the family had been moving for generations. Do you know how old the knife is? My grandmother said she was given it by her grandmother, and that grandmother had been given it by her grandmother, and it went back further than that, but she said the trail got foggy. The women who held it before her, she didn't always know their names. Dr. Paleth was writing carefully. Teth 7 was watching with an expression that, for a Karali, a species that communicated partly through the positioning of their secondary antenna, suggested intense interest. The material analysis, Dr. Paleth said carefully, indicates that this blade was worked from meteorite iron, not iron that happens to have a high nickel content. True meteoric iron, siderite alloy with a confirmed Widman-Stettin crystalline structure, which means the base material cooled at a rate of approximately 1 degree per million years, inside an iron-nickel asteroid before that asteroid impacted something. Probably Earth, given the trace silicate contamination profile, which is consistent with a high-velocity impact in a silica-rich geological zone. Siravo was quiet. We think, Dr. Paleth continued, that this blade may be, we're still running the full analysis, but our preliminary models are suggesting this blade may be between 800 and 2,000 years old, possibly older. The forging technique is consistent with historical records of meteoric iron working in several Earth cultures that had access to impact sites. The Inuit, certain Central Asian steppe cultures, ancient Egypt, though that's a different impact site. There are records of the Egyptians called meteoric iron Byainpt, iron of the sky. The room was quiet for a moment. Iron of the sky, Siravo said. The working technique on this blade, Dr. Paleth said, and now her voice had something different in it, something that wasn't quite professional detachment anymore, is extraordinary. Whoever shaped this understood the material in a way that most historical smiths did not. Meteorite iron is difficult. The crystalline structure makes it brittle at some stages of working and resistant to edge forming at others. Most historical meteoric iron items, we have maybe 200 or 300 verified examples across all Earth history, are ceremonial, beads, pendants, blade fragments that were never finished into functional tools. The number of verified functional working blades made from true meteorite iron is, she checked her tablet. According to the current database, it's 6, globally, in all of human recorded history. I was standing near the door. I'd mostly been trying to be invisible, doing my job of maintaining presence in the room without crowding it. But I heard that number and I couldn't help it. I looked at the knife. It looked ordinary. That's the thing I keep coming back to. It looked so ordinary. The wrapped handle, the worn bevel, the dark water color of the steel. It looked like the kind of knife you'd find in a drawer in someone's kitchen, between a bottle opener and a pen that was probably out of ink. 6, Siravo said. 6 verified. If this analysis holds, Dr. Paleth put down her tablet. If this analysis holds, Ms. Vo, what you have there would be the 7th. And from the age model and the working technique, it may be the oldest functional meteoric iron blade in any known collection, including Earth's. Teth 7 spoke for the first time. The Karali translated their own speech into standard through a small device, and the voice that came out was measured and formal. I would like to ask a question of a different nature, if the documentation allows. Dr. Paleth nodded. Ms. Vo, Teth 7 said. In Karali cultural tradition, objects of this nature, objects that have passed through many hands of the same bloodline over centuries, carry what we call Teth Kara. It does not translate precisely. The closest standard equivalent would be something like accumulated weight of intention. The idea that an object used with purpose, across generations, becomes something more than its materials. Do you understand what I'm describing? She looked at him, or at his antennae which was oriented toward her with full attention. I think so, she said. When I see this blade, Teth 7 said, I observe the following. The handle has been rewrapped many times. The wear pattern on the handle shows that multiple different hand sizes have held it, some small, some larger. The blade has been sharpened many times, but always carefully, always preserving the geometry of the original edge. Many someones, cared for this blade over a very long time. It was not merely kept, it was maintained. There is a significant difference. She was very still. It was used, she said quietly. Yes. My grandmother said, she said the women who held it before her, they always used it. It was never ceremonial. That was the rule she inherited, that it was a working knife, that it was kept sharp because a dull tool is disrespectful to the work. Teth 7's antenna, positioned in a way that the training materials associated with deep affirmation. That, they said, is why it survived. The full material report came back 40 minutes later. Dr. Paleth read through it, and then she read through it again, and then she put the tablet down on the table and said, "Oh," in a small voice, the way people say, "Oh," when something has happened that is larger than they expected. Ms. Vo, she said, I want to show you something. She turned the tablet so Sira could see it. I couldn't see the screen from where I was standing, but I watched Sira's face. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. Long enough that the room got quiet in a specific way, the way rooms get quiet when something significant is happening, and everyone present knows it, but no one wants to interrupt it. What does that mean? She finally asked. Her voice was very level. The trace element signature, Dr. Paleth said. The specific combination of iridium and osmium ratios in the iron. There are records, partial records, incomplete from several pre-Confederacy archaeological databases, of a meteorite impact event in Central Asia, approximately 12 to 15 centuries ago. The impact was recorded in historical documents from the region, several of them. The object was described as small but spectacular, a night crossing, bright enough to cast shadows, landing somewhere in the mountain territory. She paused. The estimated composition of that impactor, extrapolated from historical descriptions and from the trace geological evidence at the suspected impact zone, matches the trace element signature in this blade. Not approximately. The match is within the measurement error threshold. Siravo looked at the knife. The knife looked back at her the way it had been looking at all of us, ordinary, dark water, an edge that held. This blade, Dr. Paleth said quietly, was forged from a specific meteorite. We know we have historical record, imprecise but substantive, of when that meteorite fell. We know approximately where it fell, and someone within a reasonable historical window after it fell worked the metal from it into this blade. She let that sit for a moment. Someone found a piece of sky, she said, and made a working knife out of it. And then that knife passed from woman to woman for 12 centuries. Through colony settlements and diaspora migrations, and decommissioned worlds and 18-month postings on the outer rim, and it ended up in the left jacket pocket of a survey technician at Gate 7 of Hellion Transit Station. The room was quiet. Court, who had been standing near the back wall with his arms folded, uncrossed them. I noticed that his expression had changed. Court's expression almost never changed. Part 3. The Weight of What Fell from Heaven. I want to tell you what happened next, but I need to tell you something else first. There is a category of encounter in this job, rare, genuinely rare, where the thing you are processing is not just an item or a transaction or a compliance check, where the machinery of the Confederacy's bureaucracy suddenly finds itself face to face with something that predates the machinery, something that didn't come through any sanctioned channel, something that arrived here the way everything eventually arrives everywhere, which is through people carrying it across distances because it mattered to them. The scanner couldn't classify it because the database was built on the assumption that things either exist in known categories or they're anomalous in ways that suggest threat. The database wasn't built to handle the category of very old thing that survived because it was loved. That's not a criticism of the database. It's just an observation about the limits of categorization systems when they meet the actual breadth of human history. She'd carried it through 15 security checkpoints across 3 transit stations and 2 orbital platforms. She'd pulled it out at every one of them, answered the questions, waited while people ran secondary scans, watched people look at it with various degrees of confusion, and then packed it back into her left jacket pocket and moved on. She was used to this. She had a whole practiced economy around the process of the knife being flagged, and then cleared and then returned to her. She didn't have any documentation for it because there was no documentation. Her grandmother had given it to her with a cloth to wrap it in, and the instruction that a dull tool was disrespectful to the work, and that was the full provenance record. No certificates, no registration. No record in any Confederacy database, under any name of the Vo family. "I'm going to ask you something," Dr. Paleth said, and her voice was careful in the way that voices get when people are aware they are touching something that matters. "And I want you to know that whatever you answer, it has no bearing on your transit clearance. This is a personal question, not an official one." Siravo nodded once. "Do you use it still?" A pause, then yes. "For what?" "Survey work. When we're in field conditions, outer rim surveys, most of the equipment is rated for the environment, but there's always situations the rated equipment wasn't designed for, and there's maintenance. And there's," she stopped. Then she said, "the outer rim postings are long. You have a lot of time in the evenings. I whittle, not well, but it gives my hands something to do." I thought about that. A woman in a survey post on a world that didn't have a name yet, with 18 months of evenings ahead of her, sitting with a knife made from a piece of sky that fell somewhere in Central Asia 1,000 years ago, carving small shapes from whatever wood she'd found that day. "My grandmother used it for cooking," Siravo said. "Mostly. She said her mother used it for the same. She said before that she didn't know exactly, but she believed the women before had used it for most of the things you use a good knife for." "A good knife," Dr. Paleth said. "She called it that. Just the good knife. That was the only name it had." The formal report was completed at around the 4-hour mark of the review. It was 17 pages, which is about 15 more pages than standard artifact flagging documentation usually runs to, and it recommended formal registration of the item under the Confederacy Historical Preservation Protocols, which was a procedural recommendation, not a seizure order, meaning it would create a record of the item's existence without changing its ownership status. Teth 7 presented the recommendation to Siravo with careful attention to phrasing. The Karaali, I had learned over the years, had a very precise cultural sensitivity around the distinction between documentation and ownership, probably because Karaali cultural history included several painful episodes where outside parties had used documentation as a first step toward claim. Registration means that the object exists in the record, Teth 7 said. It means that Confederacy archives will hold the analysis, the provenance as you've described it, and the material report. If anything happened to the object, the record would survive. If you wish to have the object assessed or conserved by specialists at any point, the record would provide context. It does not mean the object is removed from your possession. It does not mean claims can be made against you by institutions or archives. The object remains yours. She was quiet for a moment. Will they want to put it in a museum? They may express interest, Teth 7 said honestly. You are not obligated to consider any such expression. You are the current holder of the object and the holder of that decision. She picked up the knife from the examination cloth. She held it the way she'd probably been holding it for years, not the way you hold something precious, carefully, at a distance, but the way you hold something familiar, fingers settling into the worn places on the core-drapped handle where the grip was most natural. My grandmother said museums were where things went to stop being used, she said. Nobody said anything. She said the whole point of a knife is the using. Erath had stayed in the room through the review. They'd mostly been quiet, standing near the wall with that steady amber gold color that I'd never seen on them before today. When Sira Vo picked up the knife, Erath moved forward, not quickly, not intrusively, just forward in the way that signaled they had something to say. May I speak? They asked. Sira Vo looked at them. You're the one who identified what it was. I recognize the spectrographic signature, Erath said. Veth material science has a long research history with meteoric iron. We encountered it on our own worlds before we encountered humans, and it fascinated our researchers for reasons that I think translate across species. A pause. The reason meteoric iron fascinated us, the reason it still does, is because of what it represents. Iron is common. Iron exists on 1,000 worlds, but the particular iron in a meteorite has been somewhere. It has been part of something larger, a planetesimal, an asteroid, the core of a world that didn't survive its own formation. It has traveled across distances and timescales that are another pause, that are difficult to hold in the mind, and then it fell. And then, in the case of this blade, someone found it and understood it enough to work it, and someone used it, and it passed forward. The amber gold in Erath's color was very steady. In Veth tradition, they said, there is a concept for which I'll use the standard approximation, memory that outlasts language. The idea that some things carry the imprint of everything that was done with them, even when the specific records are lost. The imprint is not mystical, it is physical. It is in the wear patterns, the edge geometry, the marks of ray sharpening, the places where the handle cord has been rewrapped because it wore through. They looked at the knife in Sira Vo's hand. This blade carries 12 centuries of working, not as metaphor, literally. The physical record of everything it was used for is written in the material. That is, in Veth terms, it is legendary in the oldest sense of the word, not because it is famous, because it holds a record. Legend, from your word legenda, things that must be read. Sira Vo looked at the knife. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, she just called it the good knife. And there was something in her voice when she said it, not grief exactly, not pride exactly, something in between those two things, something that belonged to the particular register of feeling that happens when you understand for the first time the full weight of something you've been carrying without knowing its weight. Part 4, the question that changed everything. The Galactic Confederation observer arrived at hour 5. I want to be precise about this because the timing matters. The formal report had been completed. The registration paperwork had been explained. Sira Vo had agreed to documentation, and had been answering Dr. Paleth's supplemental interview questions in the steady, economical way she answered everything. The situation in official terms was resolved. There was no conflict in progress. There was no enforcement action pending. It was, technically, a closed matter with a documentation outcome. The observer's name was Velmarath Sen. They were Doran, one of the large, slow, extremely long-lived species, with a lifespan that ran to about 400 standard years, and a deliberate quality to everything they did that was either very impressive or very frustrating depending on the context. The Doran were the oldest members of the Confederacy. They had been in space for 8,000 years before humans achieved atmospheric flight. They had been watching the expansion of intelligent species across this region of the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed in any recognizable form. They held a position in the Confederacy Cultural Taxonomy Division that I didn't fully understand and that the official title didn't clarify. Something like Senior Observer for Emerging Heritage Designations, which sounded administrative but apparently carried significant authority. They entered the secondary review room slowly, because Doran moved slowly, and because the secondary room wasn't quite large enough for a Doran to be comfortable, and they had to arrange themselves with some care, and they looked at the knife. They looked at it for a long time. Then they looked at Siravo. "I want to propose something," Velmarath Sen said, through a translator that rendered their communication, which was partly vibrational, conducted through the floor into a deep resonant standard. "I want to propose a formal Confederacy heritage classification for this item, not as an artifact, as a living heritage object." Dr. Paleth looked up from her tablet. Living heritage is a Category 4 designation. That requires. "I'm aware of what it requires," Velmarath Sen said, not unkindly, just with the particular patience of someone who had been alive for 360 years and had encountered the full range of procedural objections. "I am a certifying authority for Category 4. I am here because our monitoring systems flagged an unusual material report coming out of Hellion transit, and I wanted to assess it personally." They turned their attention back to Siravo. Category 4 living heritage means the following. The item is registered as irreplaceable, non-seizable by any Confederacy authority under any standard legal mechanism, and the holder is recognized as a heritage steward with specific protections including transit immunity, which means no customs authority can hold or confiscate the item during transit. Additionally, the Confederacy commits research resources to documenting the object's history, as comprehensively as surviving records allow. Siravo was looking at the Doran with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Not quite wariness. Not quite wonder. Something trying to work out which of those two things was more appropriate. "What does it cost?" she asked. Velmarath Sen was quiet for a moment. I got the impression, I couldn't be sure, Doran facial expression didn't work the way other species did, that they were pleased by the question, that it was the right kind of question. "Nothing," they said. "It costs nothing. The Confederacy does not purchase these designations, it recognizes them." "And if I say no?" "Then the documentation from today is filed in the standard archive, your transit clearance proceeds, and you catch your connector to Arith in a pause while they presumably checked a feed. In approximately 40 minutes. She looked at the knife in her hand. Then she asked the question that changed everything. Not because it changed the legal outcome. She was going to accept the designation. I think she'd already decided, but because of what happened after she asked it. "Was it ever part of something?" she said. "The original piece, the meteorite, do you know what it was part of?" Irath answered, because Irath had been running the trace element analysis for the past hour. "The composition signature," Irath said quietly, "is consistent with material from a class of object called a palisite. A palisite is the rarest type of meteorite. It forms at the boundary between the core and the mantle of a differentiated asteroid, one that grew large enough to develop an internal structure, like a small planet, before the asteroid was destroyed. Most meteorites are fragments of the outer rock. Pallasites are from the heart. The room was very quiet. What you have, Erath said, is a fragment of the heart of a world that didn't survive, a world that never got to be a world. That material fell to Earth and someone found it, and they understood it was different, and they shaped it into something that could be used. And it has been used for 12 centuries. A pause. The ancestor who forged this knife made something useful from the heart of a dead world. And every woman who held it after kept it sharp, because a dull tool is disrespectful to the work. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Court, who I had never once heard say anything that could be described as poetic, said, quietly and to no one in particular, "That's something." Part 5. The Connector to ARETH. The Category 4 registration was completed in 37 minutes, which was apparently a record for the Cultural Taxonomy Division. Velmarath Sen signed the designation personally, which I understood from Dr. Palath's expression to be unusual. Typically, certification came through layers of administrative processing. The Doran signed it on the spot, with what appeared to be deliberate unhurrying, each action precise and final. Siravo received a physical certificate, actual printed material, not just a data chip, because Category 4 Living Heritage designations came with a physical document for reasons that were partly historical and partly symbolic, and a small silver medallion on a cord, which was the Heritage Steward identification that transit authorities across the Confederacy were required to recognize. It meant no more amber pulses, no more secondary review rooms, no more waiting while people ran analysis on something they'd never seen before. She turned the medallion over in her hand, looking at it. "My connector," she said. 22 minutes, I told her. "Gate 12, I can walk you there." She looked up. "You don't have to do that." "I know," I said. She packed the certificate into her bag, the same bag she'd been carrying this whole time, patched canvas, one of the straps held together with a carabiner clip that was probably from survey gear. She put the Heritage Steward medallion in her right jacket pocket, and she put the knife back in her left jacket pocket, where it had been when she walked up to my gate. I walked her out of the secondary review room and through the transit floor toward Gate 12. Hellion at mid-shift is its own particular thing. The noise is constant but layered, the PA announcements in 8 languages running over each other, the particular acoustic signature of that many different species moving through a space together, the various tones and alerts, and the distant mechanical hum of the platform systems. There's a smell to it too, which visitors always notice and regulars stop noticing after about a week. Something like recycled air and industrial cleaner, and the particular ozone quality of active scanner arrays and something else, something harder to name, that I think is just what a lot of living creatures smell like when you put them all in the same place. She walked through it the way she'd stood in line, with that stillness that wasn't practiced, that was earned, watching everything without appearing to watch anything. "Does it happen a lot?" I asked. "The flagging." "Almost every major transit point," she said. "Smaller stations with older equipment sometimes miss it, but anything current gen, yes." "Does it bother you?" She was quiet for a moment. "It used to. Early on." A pause. "I was about 22 when my grandmother gave it to me. I just signed on for my first survey rotation. She said she gave me a cloth to wrap it in, and she said the women in our family had always given it to the one who was going farthest from home." I looked at her. She was watching a Veth family navigating the corridor ahead of us, 2 adults and 3 very young Veth, the children small and quick, darting between their parents' long legs. "Why you?" I asked. "Did she say?" "She said the outer rim was farther than anyone in the family had gone in a long time," Siravo said. "She said she thought the knife would like the company." The knife would like the company. I thought about that. About a woman who was maybe 70, maybe 80, handing her granddaughter a piece of a dead world's heart that had been a working knife for 12 centuries, and saying she thought it would like the company. What was she like? I asked. Small, Sierra said. Like me. She had hands like someone who'd used them her whole life, calloused in the right places. A pause. She cooked constantly. That's the main thing I remember. She cooked like it was important, like it mattered that it was done right. We reached gate 12. The connector to Arith was boarding, the gate screen showing final boarding notification in amber letters. She stopped and turned to look at me. That direct look again, the survey crew eyes. Thank you, she said. For the tea. The tea that was the least I could do, I said. She almost smiled, not quite, but almost. The Veth one, she said. Irath, what they said about it being a fragment of the heart of a dead world. She looked down at her left jacket pocket, not reaching into it, just looking at where it was. I didn't know that. I've been carrying it for 14 years and I didn't know that. How does it feel? I asked, knowing. She was quiet for a moment. The same, she said. It feels exactly the same. It was always what it was. I just didn't have the words for it. She picked up her bag, turned and walked through the gate. Part 6. What the scanner couldn't classify. I went back to my desk at gate 7, and I finished my shift. Logged the incident, all 17 pages of it, plus my own supplemental witness account, which I kept to 2 paragraphs because the official report covered the technical facts, and I wasn't sure how to add the other things to an official record. The things that weren't technical facts. The way the room got quiet when Dr. Paleth said 12 centuries. The amber gold in Irath's color. The way Court said that's something like he was surprised to hear himself saying it. The amber pulse had flagged her before she reached my desk. The system had identified the components, iron, nickel, iridium, crystalline structures, and known it was looking at something that didn't fit its categories, and it had thrown up the amber light and asked for human review. That's what amber means. The machine knows its limits. It knows when it's found something it wasn't built to handle, and it says, I need a person to look at this. I've been thinking about that since. There's a version of this story where the scanner catches an anomaly, and the anomaly turns out to be a threat, contraband, a weapon, something dangerous, and the protocols work exactly as designed, and the outcome is safety and compliance, and everyone goes home correctly documented. That's what the scanner is built for. That's the primary function. But there's also this version, where the anomaly is a piece of a dead world's heart that a woman carried in her left jacket pocket through 15 security checkpoints, because her grandmother told her the knife would like the company. Where the database couldn't classify it because the database wasn't built to hold something that old, something that had been kept sharp for 12 centuries, not because anyone told them to, but because a dull tool is disrespectful to the work. The scanner does its job. The scanner finds the thing and says, here, this is here, I don't have a category for it, I need you to look. And then you look. The last thing I'll tell you about that day is this. Before Velmarathsen left the secondary review room, they stood for a long time, long even by door and standards, looking at the examination cloth where the knife had rested during the review. Not at anything, just at the space where it had been. I asked them, I know it wasn't my place, but I asked them what they were thinking about. They were quiet long enough that I thought they weren't going to answer. Then they said, 8,000 years ago when my people first went to space, we carried things with us. Not instruments, not equipment, things that mattered to us, small things, personal things. Some of those things were very old even then. A pause. We found over 8,000 years that the things that survived the longest were the ones that were used, not preserved, used. The things that were kept for reverence stopped being what they were. They became symbols of themselves. But the things that were used, the things that kept being asked to be what they were, those things are still what they are. They looked at me with the slow, patient attention of a species that measured things in centuries. A blade kept sharp, Velmarathan said, is still a blade. The connector to Arith departed on time. I don't know what she was going to do on Arith. Maybe another survey rotation. Maybe something else. I don't know what she carved in her evenings, what small shapes came out of her hands on worlds without names. I don't know if the knife will go another 12 centuries, or 50, or 500, to other hands, other pockets, other stations where some other customs officer will get an amber pulse and a soft alert in their earpiece and look up to find something they don't have a category for. I hope they make her tea. I hope they ask her about it. I hope someone tells them, someone who knows material science, or Veth color theory, or the patience of the Doran, what it means to carry a piece of the heart of a dead world and keep it sharp because a dull tool is disrespectful to the work. The scanner flagged it as anomalous. The database called it legendary. Her grandmother just called it the good knife. I think her grandmother was right. I think her grandmother understood something that the database, for all its 4 million entries, had not quite managed to capture. That the most extraordinary things are the ones that stay useful. That the things which survive the distances, the centuries, the migrations, the colony ships and the transit stations and the outer rim postings, are the ones that kept being asked to be what they were and kept saying yes. The knife looked ordinary. That was the whole point of it. That was the whole, entire extraordinary point.